Welcome back to this speed run. We are going from 500 up to 2200 plus with the Reti and the Nimzo Sicilian. We're starting out today at 1401. So well past the beginner level into intermediate. It's going to be interesting to see how the metagame adapts. Let's get into it. We're playing 5 plus 5. So pretty fast, but we've got some time to explain. E4. We will go with the Sicilian and the Nimzo Sicilian because it's kind of the idea of this whole thing. Knight c3. White doesn't accept the challenge with e5. They defend the pawn. We are going to play d5. The whole idea of this is to kind of take our opponent out of their comfort zone, go to a non-standard position. So we're not going to play knight c6. We are going to break in the center immediately and get this position. I will block with the bishop. The knight's undefended, but I'm counterattacking the bishop, so this is fine. I could trade bishops. Knight e5 is also, actually knight e5 is one of the best ways to play this for white, although not one that you see all that often. So our opponent's thinking, so seems like maybe we've caught them by surprise, which is kind of the idea. If knight e5, you've got two choices. Knight, well, okay, they're not doing that. So we have to take with the queen to defend our knight. And generally, I think this is pretty fine position for black. We got a lot of space in the center. So white moves the knight. Obviously, they're attacking c5. I guess the simplest way to defend that is just e6. Also preparing to bring my bishop out and castle. So the position's probably about equal. We've got a nice little clock advantage going, though. And I just want to finish developing here. So let's go knight c6. Knights before the bishops is kind of the usual rule. Okay, well, I was kind of expecting my opponent to play d4 immediately. c4 looks like a bit of an odd move. I'm kind of tempted to play something like, if I could put a piece on d3, I could really jam my opponent up. So something like knight f4 is tempting. But I think white would still be in time with d4 and hitting my knight. And that doesn't seem to accomplish much. Likewise, c4, b3. I don't think I'm just really in a position to support that kind of thing yet. So let's keep it simple and just keep developing. Thing is, I don't think a c3 move does a ton, because if white now plays d4 and I take, they're not going to want to take with the pawn anyway. That would just give them an isolated pawn. And they already could take with the knight. So I will take, and I think my opponent should take with the knight. And yeah, the position's probably pretty balanced. But not bad for me at all. I mean, get to castle, finish development. I've got no weaknesses or no bad pieces in the position. So next I might think about bringing my rooks to the open files. I don't want to take on d4, at least not yet, because that would bring the queen to a strong square in the center. It's not so obvious where my rooks want to go. These are my open files. On the other hand, my pawn majority is on the king side, so I might at some point want to start moving these pawns. And for that, maybe I would want my rooks to support them. White moves the bishop to e3. This allows me to take and create an isolated pawn, and I think I will do that. This pawn can be weak. I now also have a bishop versus a knight, so this is something you have to do, especially if you are the higher rated player and the position's very dry, like this one sort of is. Create some imbalance in the position. That means something that's different about the position. So up until there, the position was extremely balanced. We had the same pieces. We had no weaknesses. Not symmetrical because the pawn structure is a bit different, but no big imbalances. Now there's much more of an imbalance in the position. I've got a bishop versus a knight, and I have a weak pawn that in the long run I can try to target. So You want that type of thing to play for, to sort of build on. All right, queen goes to e3. I think I can play knight e5 and go ahead and hit this and maybe, infiltrate somewhere here with my knight. Let's see, queen d5, knight g3. I think that this looks like a good option. We're sort of gaining a bit of space in the center here. At some point, I guess I would like to play e5 because this knight right now is doing a pretty good job of kind of blocking up what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I kind of want to get that out of there at some point. But I have to be a little bit careful with that too. Actually, I'm going to play, I think, queen c4. I don't mind a queen trade here because these pawns are going to be weak in an endgame as well. And I'm fighting for these light squares in my opponent's position. So white is thinking, do they want to accept the queen trade or move away? I don't, I think I'm kind of fine with it either way. Notice also that when you're playing, when you're trying to create an imbalance, when you're playing for a win, you don't necessarily have to be scared about trading or going into an endgame as long as you have some sort of advantage to play with in this endgame. So here I've got this pawn, I've got my bishop. So, I don't see trading queens as working towards a draw by any means. I just think I'm going to be doing well in the endgame. Opponent is really spending quite some time on this one. I think they should probably actually dodge the queen trade with a move like queen c2. Because if they take, well, that might even just cost them a pawn directly because then I'm attacking two pawns. But even if not for that, I think the endgame is going to be a little bit unpleasant for white. Another thing about blitz is you just can't take this long on one move if you really want to compete at a high level. You don't have that much time for the whole game. So this is 5+5, the increment. There's a bit more leeway to take some time, but from a sort of game management perspective, it almost never really makes sense to spend like 50% of your total time on one move. Though maybe my opponent's just like aborted or is away from the keyboard or something. I don't know what's going on. Okay, they do move. I guess, you know what? I'll go ahead and just lock in this queen trade. When you have a chance for a favorable trade, or what you believe is a favorable trade, you don't want to get too fancy. Often it's good to just, just go ahead and do it. Let's see. I'm just going to play a6. I think this is just kind of a generically useful move. At some point, I might want to play b5. Okay, and I'm actually going to shift my rooks over this way now. And you don't want to rush too much here. I do believe we have an edge in the position, but it's still fairly subtle, so we have to build up the position gradually here. Okay, knight comes in. Thinking about like even something like knight g4. That would threaten knight takes e3. Could play knight c6. Not a giant fan of that. Even f5 is kind of interesting. Might be a bit early. f5 does weaken my position a fair bit. I think I have to figure out what I want to do with my knight. I could even just play knight c6 and offer a knight trade. Actually, I think this works kind of well. Just dislodging that knight and then trying to take control of the d file. Actually, the only thing I don't like about this, though, is like if white takes, I like this. If white plays rook d1, I don't like it so much. So I was kind of regretting that move. But now that my opponent took, I'm feeling better about it. So now I have control of the open file, which is really worth a lot. And I'm probably going to play f5. Okay, he does go rook d2, so I could take, or f5 is also interesting. I think f5 looks good. That forces him to initiate this trade, because otherwise this rook would drop off. And then I can come over here and start pressuring this pawn. So bishop f6, rook c1. I don't think that does too much. So let's go bishop b6. And remember, I said this pawn was going to be the weakness. It seemed like that was not going to play out, but this is the whole point of it, identifying weaknesses in the position. They often do end up mattering later. Okay, let's go ahead and take control of this open file. You can also think about f4 at some point. Okay, rooks are best on the second rank. And I mean, it's pretty tempting to play e5. Threatening a check, perhaps. And the opponent loses on time. Well, they have a few. They can go here or here. If king up, I would just play g6. But then next, I'm thinking about things like bishop c7 check or rook d3, going after these pawns, or rook takes g2. If king g3, I could also play bishop c7, or again rook d3. White has a lot of pawns, so I do think it was a winning position, even though my opponent lost on time. Hey, if you're enjoying the speed run, don't forget we are taking it up to 2200 plus. So if you want to see what it takes to beat players at every level, don't forget to subscribe. All right, back to the action. All right, black pieces again, Nimzo again. It seems that e4 is still quite popular at the 1400 level. I do expect as we go up the rating ranks, we're going to see more d4 and then even more c4 and knight f3. But so far, it seems like e4 is still by far what we're running into the most. Okay, last time we saw bishop b5 check. This time we see bishop c4. So I will move the knight and hit the bishop. And usually you see either bishop b5 check or bishop e2. Maybe every once in a while someone gets really wild with bishop takes f7 check, which is not a good move, but that type of unsound sack. Bam, called it. Wow, somehow I had the soul read. So I'm glad we get to see this, because this is something that is not really supposed to work, but many players are scared of because it's not actually necessarily that easy to defend. So the point of this is white gave up a piece for a pawn, which is a huge material sacrifice. We have an extra piece, which is really a lot here. But you know, our king's kind of exposed, our pieces are a little awkward. So knight c6, one thing about being up a piece is you can really ignore those sort of finer points in the position, like pawn structure. Like I am offering to accept doubled isolated pawns, but the thing is that an extra piece is worth so much that I can afford to ruin my pawn structure. I can afford to do many things if I still have an extra piece. But what I really need to do is develop, and I want to eliminate this knight, which is white's most active piece. So white goes backwards, but that kind of plays into my hands as well, because that means I'm gaining time, I'm gaining development. So pretty soon, potentially I will be up a piece and ahead in development, and I get to make another tempo move here, hitting the knight and opening up my bishop. Actually, that knight is even almost kind of running short of squares. It doesn't have a lot of great squares to go to. Yeah, it comes up there. I think I'm gonna kind of want to play queen h4. And maybe I can even sort of start an attack. Yeah, why not? Threatening bishop g4. If g3, then just queen h3, and my queen is just kind of getting cozy with white's king. Okay, well, probably bishop g4 is still good. If f3, that opens this up, and I could even, ooh, I really want to go for this trap. It's probably not the best move, but it's so tempting. So what I'm thinking is h5 takes, bishop c5 check, king h1, queen wait, it doesn't even work. Queen h2, king h2, hg4, knight up. It's not even checkmate. So you know what? That would be quite stupid. So okay, we'll just go back. No problem. We're still up a piece. Actually, I could still play h5 because instead of sacking my queen, just h takes g4 would be winning. So I actually could have done that, but this is fine too. And let's bring, you really, when you're up material like this, you really want to bring all the pieces into the game. The reason I'm not playing bishop c5 check just yet is the king would move, and then maybe white would gain a tempo with one of these knights to e4 at some point, which I might not want to allow. Okay, what should we do here? I mean, at some point I do want to get this rook into the game. Knight d4 takes is not really what I want to do. Bishop c5 check is fine. Maybe just h6, king h7. And this also defends, if a knight comes to e4, I don't want to allow some sort of double attack over here. Let's offer another trade. Again, when you're ahead in material, you can use this strategy of creating trade offers, which then, if your opponent declines, they have to move away. I'm actually going to move the rook. So one idea is bishop c5. Taking with the bishop would have been fine too. Maybe better. So yeah, now I really just want to get this bishop out and play like king, rook. Once I have all my pieces into the game, up a piece, should be good. I think white should play knight e4 to at least prevent me from playing bishop c5. But then I could just play something like bishop e7. I guess f4 is also possible. Okay, so white is threatening some sort of discovered stuff. Let's just play bishop c5, trade that off. Note how you want to answer your opponent's threats and advance your own plans at the same time. So I could also have answered that by like queen d8, but then I'm just retreating my queen. This move also stops the discovered attack, but also develops a piece and trades something off. So we're getting closer to an endgame where it would be really easy in an endgame to win with our extra piece. I'll go ahead and just trade this. I could also sort of maintain the tension there, but we'll just simplify it. Rook takes, and I think I can bring my king out to bring the rook out now. I have to watch out for some sort of queen check, but my queen has that covered. Do also want to watch out for this, which is undefended, but don't think white can really take advantage of that at this point. I guess f4 would probably be worth a shot for white, just to try to complicate the issue. But I don't think it's really a problem for me. So they do go knight e4. Just double the rooks and create some pressure here. And if f4 now, then bishop g4 would be a skewer. So basically, this is what we're aiming for. We've got all the pieces developed, and white doesn't really have any counterplay. Okay, they're lining up here. I could play knight d4, but then like queen c7. I'll just play, I think, bishop f5, threatening a trade, but also looking at this pawn. Another good move would have been knight b4, hitting the queen and preparing to take this. Okay. Well, I'll just drop back. Note that my pieces are all centralized. They're all defending each other. There's another thing you want to do. Just bring everything to the center, really solid. Everything defended. Nothing the opponent can really try to do. Okay, I'm fine to trade. And I guess rook c5 looks good. Again, actually knight b4 was still possible, so probably should have done that. But it's fine. We don't really need any extra extra stuff at this point. And look at that beautiful outpost square for that knight as well. Even with equal material, something like that would be a huge advantage. But that knight is fully an extra knight. I guess I can send my queen in here, maybe? Queen d7, I don't love. There's also rook c1 check. What's the best way to actually do this? Well, maybe, okay, we'll start with rook c1 check, and I'm actually going to play b5. Just chase that queen away. This also conveniently defends this. Okay, and I think now I can come in with queen h4, or even knight e6. Actually, this looks really good. Let's bring the knight in here. And once my knight is participating in the attack with the rook and the queen, by the way, important that takes queen f5 is not perpetual. Queen f5, but I'd have g6. Okay, and I think this king over. Okay. So now queen h4 looks good. Queen takes e5, queen takes g4, king e3. Actually, that's sort of annoyingly not that clear. I mean, it is still clear. I'm still up a piece, but it's not like a forced mate. I guess I could start with queen g5. Queen comes in. What do we want to do here? Knight h3 looks quite good. Threatening knight takes or queen f4. My opponent is now feeling the pain for giving up that piece on, what was it, move 6? But yeah, being down a piece will come back to haunt you. I mean, I guess they could play queen f5 check and force a queen trade, but you know, it's not gonna save them in a rook down endgame. Okay, so they decide not to trade queens, but probably that's going to lead to them getting checkmated. Actually, queen f4, maybe, I mean, doesn't really matter too much here. Okay, and this is mate. Good game. Actually, really important game, because I do see this a lot at this level, these kind of wild, unsound, sort of coffee house type sacrifices. I know a lot of people are scared of these, but you should really be happy to see this on the board. And it's important to keep an aggressive, like a solid but aggressive mentality here. You don't want to play too defensively. You want to develop rapidly and stay on the offensive. If you become too passive, then your opponent will eventually attack you and it's going to get difficult. But if you develop quickly and take over the initiative and you still have the extra piece, then everything's working in your favor. Okay, first white game, knight f3. And g3 it is. b6. Well, I'll castle. Kind of an odd move. Could play d4, could play c4, b3. I mean, we'll just do c4. Maybe I should have played c4 first before my opponent got to play bishop b7. Probably would have been more accurate. E3. There's no tactics with knight takes d4. What about queen a4 check? Actually seems kind of annoying for black to deal with, because almost any block would allow knight takes d4. For instance, knight d7, knight takes d4, queen d7 trade, knight takes d4. So I think my opponent has to play bishop c6. And yes, now I have to go back, but this bishop is kind of misplaced here. So I guess we'll just kind of go for this Benoni structure. It's a weird position because the bishop is misplaced, but my queen is not necessarily the best on c2 either. So how do I want to develop here? I mean, I could even knight d2, b3. That's not typically a plan that would work in this type of structure, but with the bishop on c6, maybe it could. I could also just play bishop g5. Let's try this. Kind of a weird situation that where it's hard for white to defend d4, or black rather, because normally they could just play c5. And if they take here, I'm definitely going to be happy to get that light square bishop. Likewise, Bishop c5 allows me to take and create a weak pawn. Okay, so here though, this looks like a free pawn. So I will take and be quite happy. My knight gets chased around a bit, but not really a problem. Do you want to keep an eye out for some sort of discovered attack utilizing this? I haven't seen an opportunity for that yet, but wouldn't be surprising if that came along at some point in the game. So again, we find ourselves up material and we want to finish development and put that to work. So I think bishop f4 is fine. And yeah, I think I'll just go, what do I want to do? Bishop e3, bishop d2. So with knight d4, I'll just take with the bishop. Or actually maybe even knight takes is possible, because I'm hitting counterattacking black's bishop as well. Okay, so knight takes d4. If pawn takes, bishop takes b7 is good. If bishop takes, knight takes e6, pawn takes, king takes g2, I win another pawn. I think this works actually. So I'll hit this knight. Now the knight can go back, and I do actually lose my piece back at the end of the day, but I'm getting like a few pawns out of the deal. So I'm actually going to be up 2 pawns at the end of this. Unless I have some tricky way to save my piece. But I don't believe that I do. But okay, I'm happy with 2 extra pawns. And the bishop pair to boot. So at some point, I want to start advancing my extra pawns and create a pass pawn, but there's not really any rush to do that. Weirdly, I'm almost lacking open files for my rooks because I have too many pawns, but it's like a good problem to have. So the opponent thinking, I don't think there's much they can do actively to sort of cause any problems in this position. All right, I think I'm going to play b4. Start moving with these pawns. I kind of like keeping this pawn chain intact, so I'll start with this one. And yeah, well, a trade. So I no longer have the bishop pair, but that's fine. So thinking about like d4, c5, just create some pass pawns with these extra pawns eventually. I'll just bring the rook over first. No rush, really. Yeah, queen trade is fine. And let's start rumbling with the pawns. We've got those extra pawns, might as well use them. Okay, so white threatens this, but totally fine to just advance that. And let's take this way. I guess I could force some rook trades. Sure, let's force some rooks off the board. Eventually I want to take this way, but might as well take a pair of rooks off. And this bishop is going to do a nice job of supporting my pawns too. Knight goes back. Okay. So I guess I have to trade now. I mean, well, not really. I could go over here. Actually, I kind of like this move. Going after this pawn. Knight goes back. Let's just play e3, just make sure all our stuff is nicely defended. And then maybe a4, b5. And finally get that pass pawn. Or even b5 directly. I think pawn takes looks good. I mean, rook takes also good, but pawn takes looks good. Not afraid of rook c1 check. I will just trade and move my king up. And of course, this is classic strategy. When you've got an extra pawn, used to make a pass pawn in the endgame. Yeah, rook b1, probably a good move, but I think I can just come in here. And this knight may even be trapped. Yeah, rook b7. Oh, wait. Well, rook b7, the knight would be trapped, but there's also bishop e4 check. Okay, and the opponent resigns. Flawless game, nice. Hey, if you made it to the end of the video, first of all, thanks for watching. And if you want to learn much more about these openings, you might want to check out my courses on Chessable, where I explain everything in much more detail. You also get the move trainer technology to practice the moves. So check those out. The links are in the video description. Thanks.